There are things your dog does when you're not around that, at first glance, seem random, harmless, or even a little strange, but when you look closer, they reveal something much deeper about how your dog feels when you're gone, how they perceive your absence, and how strongly they are emotionally connected to you in ways most owners never fully realize. Because the truth is, dogs don't experience alone time the way humans do. They don't frame it as a break or a quiet moment or even something neutral. Instead, for many of them, your absence creates a shift in their emotional state, and what they do during that time is not accidental. It is expressive, intentional, and often deeply revealing. Some dogs become unusually quiet, others start pacing, some seek out objects that smell like you, while others might sit by the door long after you've left. And although these behaviors can look simple on the surface, each one is part of a silent language your dog is using to cope, to process, and sometimes to call for something they don't know how to ask for directly. And here's where it becomes even more important to pay attention, because certain behaviors that seem cute or quirky can actually be subtle signs of emotional distress, while others that might seem concerning at first are, in reality, your dog's way of self-soothing and adapting in a healthy way. In this video, you're going to understand what your dog is really saying through these behaviors, what's normal, what's not, and how to tell the difference between a dog that simply misses you and a dog that might be struggling more than you think. Because once you start recognizing these patterns, you won't just see your dog the same way again, you'll start understanding them. And that changes everything. One of the most common and emotionally loaded behaviors happens right after you leave, when your dog positions themselves near the door, the window, or any space connected to your exit, and stays there far longer than most people would expect, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, quietly waiting, observing, and holding on to something that isn't immediately visible. At first, this can look like simple habit, as if your dog is just used to seeing you leave from that spot, but in reality, this behavior is tied to anticipation, attachment, and a cognitive pattern that mixes memory with expectation, because your dog is not just watching the door, they are mentally tracking the last place where your presence existed. Dogs build strong associative maps, and the exit point of the house becomes emotionally significant, almost like a portal where you disappear and, from their perspective, where you are most likely to return, which is why staying there feels, to them, like staying connected to you in some way. But there's an important distinction here that most people miss. If your dog waits calmly, eventually relaxes, and transitions into other activities, this is usually a sign of a secure attachment, meaning they miss you, but they trust that you'll come back, and their nervous system is able to settle over time. However, if your dog remains fixed in that spot, shows signs of restlessness, whining, excessive alertness, or repeatedly reacts to every small noise as if it could be you returning, then this behavior may be leaning into separation-related stress, where the waiting is no longer calm anticipation, but unresolved tension. In these cases, the door is no longer just a place, it becomes a trigger, reinforcing the cycle of anxiety each time you leave. Understanding this difference is crucial because the behavior itself might look identical on the outside, but internally, your dog is experiencing something completely different. And once you can read that difference, you stop guessing and start responding in a way that actually supports your dog's emotional balance. If you're paying attention, your dog has already been showing you which side they're on. Before we move deeper into the more subtle and often misunderstood behaviors, it's worth noticing how much your dog is already communicating without a single sound. And if this kind of insight is helping you see your dog in a more precise and empathetic way, following the channel ensures you don't miss the next layers of understanding that most owners never get access to. Another behavior that reveals a lot about your dog's emotional state when you're gone is something many people find endearing at first, but rarely stop to analyze, which is when your dog actively seeks out objects that carry your scent, like your clothes, your bed, your shoes, or even the exact spot where you usually sit. This isn't random, and it's not just about comfort in a general sense. It's about familiarity acting as a stabilizing force in your absence. Because for dogs, scent is the strongest emotional anchor they have, far more powerful than sight or sound, and your scent represents safety, presence, and connection all at once. When your dog curls up on your clothes or rests their head on something that smells like you, what they're doing is recreating a version of your presence that their brain can still access, even when you're physically gone, which helps regulate their emotional state and reduce the intensity of the separation. In many cases, this is actually a healthy coping mechanism, especially if the dog is able to settle, relax, and even sleep while surrounded by these familiar scents, because it shows that they have found a way to self-soothe using what is available to them. But again, the context changes everything. If this behavior becomes obsessive, if your dog is constantly moving from one scented object to another, unable to settle, or if they begin destroying items that carry your scent, like tearing clothes or chewing shoes, then what you're seeing is no longer simple comfort-seeking, it's escalation driven by anxiety and frustration. At that point, your scent is no longer just calming, it becomes a reminder of absence, which can intensify the emotional loop instead of easing it. This is why two dogs can show the exact same behavior, lying on your clothes, and yet be experiencing completely different emotional realities. One is calm, grounded, and reassured. The other is searching, unsettled, and trying to cope with something they don't fully understand. And the difference is subtle, but once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. There is a behavior that often goes unnoticed because it doesn't involve destruction, noise, or obvious distress, but it reveals something incredibly precise about how your dog processes your absence, which is when they begin to follow a silent routine that mirrors your presence, even when you're not there. Some dogs will move between the rooms you usually occupy, pause in specific spots where you spend time, or lie down in areas that seem oddly intentional, as if they are tracing an invisible path that only makes sense from their perspective, and in a way, that's exactly what they are doing. Dogs are pattern-driven observers, and over time, they build detailed mental maps of your daily behavior, including where you sit, where you walk, how long you stay in certain places, and even the sequence of your movements. And when you're gone, some dogs replay parts of that map as a way to maintain a sense of structure and predictability. This is not imagination, and it's not confusion, it's cognitive recall combined with emotional regulation, because by revisiting these familiar patterns, your dog is reinforcing a sense of normalcy in an environment that suddenly feels incomplete. When this behavior is calm and fluid, when your dog moves, settles, and eventually rests without signs of agitation, it usually indicates a balanced internal state, where your absence is acknowledged but not destabilizing, and your dog is able to organize their time in a way that feels safe. However, when this same pattern becomes repetitive, rigid, or restless, when your dog cannot settle, keeps cycling through the same spaces, or appears unable to finish the routine, then what you're seeing is not structure, but a loop, a sign that your dog is trying to recreate something they cannot resolve. In those cases, the routine is no longer grounding, it becomes a symptom. And just like before, the behavior itself doesn't change nearly as much as the emotional state behind it. Your dog is always showing you the difference. You just need to know how to read it. By now, you've probably started to recognize pieces of your own dog in these behaviors, maybe in the way they wait by the door, or how they settle into your clothes, or even in the quiet routines they follow when the house feels different without you. And what once seemed like small, disconnected actions begins to form a much clearer picture when you understand what's actually driving them. Because the goal here is not to label every behavior as good or bad, or to jump to conclusions every time your dog repeats a pattern, but to develop a more accurate way of observing, where you start paying attention to intensity, duration, and emotional tone instead of just the behavior itself. A dog lying by the door is not the same as a dog fixated on it. A dog resting on your clothes is not the same as a dog unable to leave them. A dog moving through the house is not the same as a dog trapped in repetition. And once you begin to notice these differences, something shifts because you're no longer reacting to what your dog is doing, you're understanding why they're doing it, and that changes how you respond in a way your dog can actually feel. Sometimes the right response is doing nothing at all, allowing your dog to self-regulate and build confidence in your absence, and other times it's about adjusting small details in their environment, their routine, or even how you leave and return home, so that the emotional experience becomes more predictable and less intense. What matters most is that you stop guessing. Your dog is not being random, dramatic, or overly dependent. They are responding to a bond that, for them, is one of the most important structures in their world. And everything they do when you're gone is part of how they try to manage that bond in your absence. Once you truly see that, you don't just leave the house the same way anymore. You leave with awareness, and your dog feels the difference.